This podcast is brought to you by North Carolina's electric cooperatives.
This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Welcome to Balanced Debate for the Old North State. This week promises to be intriguing as we begin by talking about Wednesday's student walkouts to protest gun violence. We'll discuss the state Republican Party's proposal for a federal investigation into the Atlantic Coast Pipeline deal, try to figure out where we stand on the State Board of Elections after one lawsuit is dismissed and another is initiated. And since this is Sunshine Week, we're going to talk about the state of open government in our state. And of course, we can't end the show without asking our panel to tell us something we don't know. Speaking of the panel, let's introduce you to this week's cast. They include Chris Fitzsimon, political analyst and syndicated columnist; Rufus Edmisten, former Secretary of State and former Attorney General. We've got Rick Henderson, who's the editor-in-chief of the Carolina Journal, and John Hood, the syndicated columnist and author. Well, we're going to begin our uninterrupted debate after these brief messages from our underwriters.
From treating the newest member of your family to helping a loved one make end-of-life decisions, your family physician is with you every step, for every stage of life, for every member of your family. Despite a healthcare landscape fraught with potential landmines, family physicians across North Carolina are providing you a lifetime of committed, dependable medical care. Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisor for life.
Agriculture. It's North Carolina's #1 economic driver. It puts people to work. It powers our economy. And as agriculture grows, so does our quality of life. North Carolina Farm Bureau is proud to support agriculture and our farmers because agriculture connects us all.
Students across North Carolina marched out of their classrooms on Wednesday as a symbol of solidarity with the students at Parkland High School in Florida. Now, students in schools across the country were urged to get up from their desk and walk out of their classrooms at 10 a.m. on the one-month anniversary of the Parkland massacre. Chris, were you surprised by the number of students here in North Carolina that participated in the walkout? And if so, tell us why.
I don't think I was. I think this is a growing national movement. There's going to be a march coming up this coming week on Washington and around the country. I think the students have done something that a lot of people have been trying to do for a long time, which is focus attention on policies, not just reacting and sending thoughts and prayers. And you saw a conservative state of Florida actually pass some significant changes in gun laws in Florida. Very conservative legislature, very conservative governor. I think we're going to see this continue until some changes are made.
John, here in North Carolina, we saw some areas and some school districts where there was pretty large participation from students, and then others that didn't hardly show up at all. Was this because there was some group catalyst or some force in play here, or what?
I don't think that these protests were instigated by Democratic political operatives or something like that. I do think there was facilitation. If there were, in fact, some Democrats, elected officials that spoke in some cases, which I think it was entirely inappropriate. They shouldn't have allowed that to happen. Yeah. But there's some genuine feeling on the part of these teenagers, understandably so. Their knowledge about gun laws and policy matters is limited, as you would expect from a teenager. But their sentiment is noteworthy, and I think that, as Chris was saying, in Florida, most of those provisions that were in the bill in Florida, particularly the attempt to have a legal process in front of a judge to remove guns from people who lots of their family members or acquaintances have evidence to suggest there's something wrong. I think that is something that most people can be behind, a unifying thing, but attempts to ban guns are going to fail.
Yeah,
always.
I was going to ask about that, Rick. The Parkland students did get laws changed in the state of Florida, and they won't change in Washington, changing the legal age, raising the legal age to 21, stricter background checks. any notion that Congress will do anything at all, or is the charge accurate that Congress is bought and paid for by the NRA?
Well, if the NRA didn't exist, we'd still have the Second Amendment. We would still have tens of millions of gun owners in the United States. And so the NRA is a convenient bogeyman. You can complain about what they do. There are an awful lot of gun owners who don't like the NRA because they think they sell out too frequently. I don't think we're going to see increases, across the board increase in the age that's allowed for gun ownership, simply because if you can enlist in the military at age 18, but you can't own a firearm, that's pretty crazy. And so you're going to see, you may see some changes. And I think the idea of, as John mentioned, of what's called the gun violence restraining order, that's something that is likely to catch on. I don't know if it'll be done federally, but I think it will be done in the states. And also you're seeing in places across North Carolina, the counties have been enabled to set up voluntary trained forces for resource officers in schools that can't
Rufus,
afford them.
our friend and fellow panelist, former Supreme Court Justice Bob Orr, wrote an op-ed piece. I don't know whether you saw it in the Charlotte Observer or not. But I want you to listen to what he said. I'm going to read this. I'm quoting now. 18 years into the 21st century, one issue defines the Republican Party, its office holders, candidates, and party officials: guns. Yes, the grand old party nationally, statewide, and locally is a wholly owned subsidiary of the National Rifle Association. Love it or hate it, no matter the rhetoric or the circumstances, the GOP's defining identity is to wrap itself in the Second Amendment right to bear arms and dance in perfect harmony to the NRA's tune.
Well, a lot of people really love that. I think that was a little bit hyperbole on the part of Justice Bob.
He's not known for hyperbole, by the way.
No,
well,
what are you talking about?
I said that tongue-in-cheek.
Well, I still think the abiding principle of the Republican Party is less government. And I want to disagree with John a little bit. He said a moment ago that these kids are not as well informed. I think they're better informed than the adults, and that's why they're getting some traction. I think it's not lost on most people that they are reaching the voting age too. Now, if you don't move something when you shoot a bunch of first and second graders in Connecticut, but then you wonder why they're working, well, first of all, they are knowledgeable about it, and secondly, they're going to be voters very soon.
A lot of people, Chris, think that, assuming Rick is right, and I think most of us would agree that he is, that nothing probably is going to happen in Washington, that the laws are going to have to be changed on the state level. Representative Rodney Moore, who's a Democrat in North Carolina, says he's going to introduce legislation to eliminate bump stocks, raise the age for exempting guns and for buying rifles, and exempting safety officers from that. Is there any feeling this legislation is ever going to get any hearing at all?
Well, I hope it gets a hearing. I think it's a significant proposal, whether you agree with it or not, and I hope it deserves a hearing. I mean, I hope it does get a hearing. It deserves one. I think given the current leadership of the General Assembly, particularly in the Senate, it's probably unlikely. But I do want to go back. Every time we talk about this issue, nobody's talking about repealing the Second Amendment. Nobody's talking about every gun. We have restrictions on every amendment. So I've said this before on the show. You can't say anything you want under the First Amendment. And I think the First Amendment is the most important amendment, but there are limits on things you can say. All we're talking about is having a reasonable debate about what the Second Amendment means. We already banned some weapons. All weapons aren't available to everybody. The question is degrees and nuance, and this debate has lost all of that. It's either one side claims that you want to ban every gun, the other side claims that they want guns in everybody's hands all the time. We need to have a reasonable discussion. I think these teenagers, of all people, have managed to start that in the country, and I applaud them for it.
John, in addition to Representative Moore, Governor Roy Cooper jumped on the bandwagon last week by advocating legislation to raise the age. Do you think this was a political ploy, or do you think he really plans to spend some political capital trying to get something done in the legislature?
I think that it was a political move, but there's nothing wrong with that. He's the governor of North Carolina, and he gets to do that. I'm sure he believes, or his administration believes, in these various items. I think that banning bump stocks would probably be pretty easy. I think gun violence restraining orders of some system like that would be doable. I think raising the age to buy a rifle to 21, which is a sort of a placebo, it has no real likely effect on any kind of gun violence, it's probably not going to happen. And again, the Parkland kids, lots of kids, Chris, their view is unless you're banning AR-15s, you're not serious. And I'm telling you, we will never ban semi-automatic rifles, which are owned by millions and millions of people. That is never going to happen. So if the test is you're a wholly owned subsidiary,
before George W. Bush.
That's right, and it was so silly that it will never be done again.
Did it create this massive lack of freedom in America?
It had absolutely no effect on violence, and it reduced people's freedom. That's why it will not be done again.
Nobody has advocated taking those guns up, John. All they're saying is don't let kids who are under 18 years old or under 21 years old buy them.
Oh, wait a minute. I want to hear some more between the two of you, because you say yes, they are advocating taking the guns.
The kids in Parkland and the movement behind them and all the national movement behind, their view is they will take all these other things. They would like to do these other things, but you're not serious, and you're a wholly owned subsidiary of the NRA if you won't ban AR-15s. And I'm telling you, that is a silly position that will never persuade the people in the middle. And what we need to be talking about is the kinds of things like...
The people in the middle do... Bump stocks is an interesting issue because the people in the middle also believe you shouldn't be able to shoot a gun 100 times without reloading as a civilian.
Right.
Like, what purpose does that
ban
serve?
Those. That's what I'm saying. That is entirely persuadable.
But we've debated...
That's the bump stock issue.
Sure, get rid of them.
Well,
or it's also the size of magazines. Nobody's talking about that. You can buy it.
Everybody's misinterpreting what the courts have said about the Second Amendment. The Heller case in D.C. said that a person's allowed to have a gun in their home to protect themselves. It went on even with the judge that died, saying this does not mean you get to own a machine gun or a bazooka.
Correct.
The Second Amendment has limitations.
Virtually no one does, because it is virtually impossible.
But Rufus's point is the Second Amendment isn't absolute. You can't own any weapon you want.
No one argues that the Constitution gives people the right to own bazookas.
Rick is trying to find a wedge in here. Go ahead, Rick.
No, I'm just saying, that's right. The Second Amendment is not absolute. However, there are lots of people involved in very organized campaigns, some of them quite sincere about it, who say we need to ban private ownership of firearms.
President Trump has recommended arming teachers. An Elon University poll that was released this past week said that 78% of the teachers said they don't want guns and they think it's a terrible idea. Is it going anywhere?
I hope not, because I've come from a family of teachers, and not a one of them. And we're sons of a wildlife protector. Been around guns all my life, and you have so much leeway there for people to get hurt accidentally with a teacher packing a gun.
Well, historians tell us the last time we saw a student movement like this was during the era of the civil rights movement. Those students weren't successful in getting done what they wanted to get done at the time, but they started the movement such that it swayed public opinions towards civil rights. It'll be interesting to see whether the students have the energy and the stick-to-itiveness to stay with that. Well, this week saw a protest of another sort from the state Republican Party. The controversy over the $58 million fund created in conjunction with the Atlantic Coast Pipeline just won't go away. Even though Republican legislative leaders took the money from Governor Cooper's oversight and redirected it to schools along the path of the pipeline, they won't let the issue go. And this week, Robin Hayes, the chair of the North Carolina Republican Party, staged a press conference at the federal courthouse in Raleigh, asking the U.S. Attorney General's office to conduct an investigation into the memorandum of understanding created around how that money was spent, saying it was extortion. Rufus, most observers, including probably Governor Cooper, would agree this whole situation could have been handled better. But you were the state's Attorney General. This issue about extortion, what do you got to do in order to be able to make a case that extortion existed? Isn't that a pretty high bar to set?
I agree that it could have been handled better, and I think
everybody
the administration will say that. Anybody can go and stand in front of a courthouse, and you can say, I want the U.S. Attorney to bring charges, just like Governor Cooper can protest what he wants to do. That's the nature of things in this country. But that doesn't mean that there's a meaningful case there. I don't find any attachment of any alleged activity that rises to the level of a federal investigation.
I was going to say, Rick, you follow this pretty closely with Carolina Journal, and we've seen the written statements, we've seen the comments that the various parties, beginning with the memorandum that came out of the Farm Bureau meeting last July and so forth like that. Do you see any evidence of extortion?
In a federal case, I don't see necessarily that that's going to happen. Now, But that's from
Is that a no?
That's from what we know right now. And one of the big problems, and something that the Cooper administration could have been much better about in doing this, is doing a better job of explaining why they had to engage in these negotiations between private parties, why they had to insert themselves and keep the General Assembly out. The best explanation we have seen so far has been from Ken Udy, Governor Cooper's top political advisor, who went on a television station to say, we wanted to prevent the Republicans in the General Assembly from getting any credit for this. Now, it's not even clear that this deal is legal. How do you negotiate money to come to the state controlled by the governor with no General Assembly approval? It's nowhere in the Constitution. So this looks entirely like a political move to try to assuage environmentalists who oppose the pipeline, and it was bungled everywhere. But I'm not sure that there's anything that would necessitate a federal investigation
I
here.
agree with the last thing Rick said, which is this is a big political battle. The reason we're also talking about it is Robin Hayes had a press conference as the state Republican Party chair to make sure that everybody keeps talking about it, because the Republicans think this is somehow some secret plan to overthrow the government and the Cooper administration like Watergate or something. When really what we have is a bungled attempt by the governor to figure out a way to negotiate a way to have the pipeline and keep a lot of people happy, which is what politicians do. The argument is really whether or not whether or not it's legal, whether or not who controls the money to mitigate the effects of the pipeline. The legislature, the governor, that's not a crime.
There's another reason for this too, isn't there, John? There's a $92 million settlement coming from the Volkswagen Clean Air case. And Republicans in the legislature were eager to make sure that Governor Cooper didn't get control of that. Governor Cooper, on the other hand, is eager to make sure that the legislature doesn't do what they did with the $58 million. Comment on that.
Well, he can't do that because if it's a state revenue, the legislature could foolishly or wisely appropriate it accordingly. This is a case where the governor, having been formerly the Attorney General for a long time and familiar with this growing practice of collusive lawsuits, where you get somebody to sue the state, then you settle this awful case that you really wanted, so you can get money out of it, so you can direct it to the people that you want to direct it to. This is a game that lots of attorneys general, after Rufus served, started to play. And I think that that should not have happened before. The governor should not try to import that kind of thinking here. If you get a settlement and it is state revenue, then talk to the legislature. I'm sure that you can work it out. This is an unnecessary fight. The governor, I think, is destined to lose.
All right, but the other side of this, though, Rufus, is this is an environmental issue. These funds were passed. This settlement was agreed to because Volkswagen violated the Clean Air Act, essentially, is what it boiled down to. Mm-hmm. Now, Governor Cooper's saying it should become money that is used and dedicated to environmental. He wants it to go to the Department of Environmental Quality. He's afraid that if the legislature gets their hand on it, it's going to be another gallon of water down Niagara Falls, and it won't do anything to help our environment.
Well, first of all, let's point out that the money's not even there now. Nobody knows. If you were to tell the pipeline folks where to send the money, they wouldn't know where. And secondly, the people, part of the settlement is to get energy to those farmers and businesses down there. And if we don't do it...
And they're still upset about this, by the way, because now the money's going to the schools.
Now the money is going to be, and the taxpayers will end up paying for the pipeline to be to their benefit, i.e. farmers and businesses.
Dear viewer, I wish I could tell you this was the end of this discussion. I have suspicion that we're going to be talking about this again on NC Spin. Well, sometimes the defendant, sometimes the plaintiff. Governor Cooper is obviously familiar with courtrooms. And in 8 weeks, North Carolinians will go to the poll to vote in the primary elections. One thing noticeably absent in these elections will be a state board of elections as of right now. A December 2016 special session of the legislature merged the Ethics Commission with the State Board of Elections and changed the way the board members will be appointed. Well, Governor Cooper immediately sued, saying the law took away his ability to administer an executive branch agency, and the Supreme Court ruled that while the merger was legal, they agreed with him that the way the board was appointed didn't breach separation of powers and remanded it back to the Superior Court. That court, basically a week ago, upheld the Supreme Court decision, but had the case that Governor Cooper had instituted asking for the total dismissal of the law dismissed. In the meantime, John Hood, after that 3-judge panel dismissed the governor's attempts, Then Cooper turned to HB 90, which was the Christmas tree bill that we all have been talking about for so long, that added a 9th person to the State Board of Elections, one who had to be unaffiliated. With the previous court decisions sort of going against Governor Cooper, how are his chances on this one?
It's unclear because the way the selection process for the 9th position, which I think is colloquially known as the Tom Campbell slot, I think that's the correct term.
If it's not, it should be.
Yeah. But the idea there is that the 4 Ds and 4 Rs that are put on the board would then select options for the 9th. And so it could be argued that, again, the governor doesn't have enough sway over that decision. We'll have to see. The governor thought he could get the court to strike the entire merged board down, and that was, I think, always unlikely. I mean, there's nothing in the Constitution or in case law that would suggest we have to have a separate ethics board, that we have to have an elections board that has a partisan majority. None of that is required.
But specifically, what Cooper's after right now is getting rid of that 9th member. Is that correct, Rufus?
That's what it is right now legally.
And does he have a chance of you're a lawyer? Or you play one on television sometimes?
Yeah, well, there's always a chance. And the truth about this is symptomatic of the system we have today, where the branches of government are just at one another for no good reason. Now, I agree with John that if the legislature said we want to put the elections board under the Secretary of State, they could do it.
They could.
And so there's no question there to me about that. But the truth is here that it is a shame to have an election without an elections board. It's like going to a dance without a band.
He says he's going to name the board now.
Yes, he's relenting in doing that because he didn't for the longest period of time. And now that he's going to name these board members, we have to figure out again, he's going to name the board, he's also suing to get rid of it too at the same time.
All right, let's move from here for a second. Most people believe that government functions best when it operates in the open, and this has been Sunshine Week in the state of North Carolina and across the nation. We focus on shining the light on access to public records and meetings of closed sessions. 10 respectable newsrooms in our state requested that 50 state and local public bodies provide minutes of those closed sessions they held in 2017. And the results are quite interesting. Rick, we're running short of time, so give me a quickie. What was your impression of what they found?
What they found is that we still have the worst open government laws in the nation, and that's not just my opinion. That what they found was that these boards quite often would go into closed session. They would not report what they did in closed session. They would not even do so after the fact. They wouldn't even hide behind personnel laws. And
the media sources complain and individuals complain, Rufus, that when they make requests for public records, it takes far too long. The agencies either don't ignore them or when they do finally provide it, they're redacted heavily. Yeah. Rick says we got the weakest open meetings laws in the country, public records laws.
We do, but I think the Cooper administration is doing a pretty good job on it. Now, here's the problem, Tom, about the situation today. They absolutely don't put the manpower to it.
All right.
You can do it.
Anything going to happen, Chris?
I hope so, but you know, it's good. The public officials are going to be the ones that have to change the law.
All right. So they're the ones who passed it. And by the way, the legislature exempted themselves, John.
Well, open government is good. I wish that politicians always agreed with that, but the rest of the public does.
All right. Now, it's time to move on to the part of the show where we ask the panel to tell us something we don't know. Chris Fitzsimon, tell us something we don't know.
Well, we're in the middle of March Madness. Everybody's keeping up with their favorite college basketball teams. NC State this morning, released its subpoena in the FBI probe of corruption in the basketball. If you thought fake classes at UNC, if you thought other things were scandals, I think by the time we're sitting here a year from now, college sports will be dramatically changed. The FBI is serious.
I agree. Jay Billis said as much in columns on ESPN. Rufus, tell us something we don't know.
The recognized J.C. Burns Center is such a national treasure that we are now helping South Carolina get one of their own back.
All right. Rick Henderson, tell us something we don't know.
Going to the polls in 8 weeks, and 12 counties are going to have sales tax referendums on the ballot, and maybe more.
We had not even talked about them.
That's right, and it's going to happen. They always put them on the primary ballots and off-year elections, hoping that people don't show up to the polls, except for the folks who want the taxes.
If they're unfavorably approved, it won't reflect on them as they're running for re-election.
That's right.
John Hood, tell us something we don't know.
The top statewide race this year is for Supreme Court between Barbara Jackson, the Republican, and Anita Earls, the Democrat. I think this will end up being one of the most expensive judicial races in our history.
Even more so than the last time?
Well, it's the only major, well, there's some appeals court races, but there aren't any Senate or governor's races on the ballot in North Carolina, I think there'll be a lot of resources put into this, both hard money and soft money.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, we're going to have a lot of discussion about that on next week's show, by the way, so I invite you to be sure and stay tuned for that. Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, give your feedback, and read my weekly column, be sure to visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch NC Spin on Facebook. And join us next week when we'll have more balanced debate for the Old North State. Until then, as we always say, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
From treating the newest member of your family to helping a loved one make end-of-life decisions, your family physician is with you every step, for every stage of life, for every member of your family. Despite a healthcare landscape fraught with potential landmines, family physicians across North Carolina are providing you a lifetime of committed, dependable medical care. Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisor for life.
Agriculture. It's North Carolina's #1 economic driver. It puts people to work. It powers our economy. And as agriculture grows, so does our quality of life. North Carolina Farm Bureau is proud to support agriculture and our farmers because agriculture connects us all.
North Carolina Channel is made possible by the financial contributions of viewers like you who support the UNC TV network.